Do not attempt what you're about to see.
I just spent weeks making a scary marshmallow with fully functional lights, a speaker, and the ability to shoot fireballs.
And it's called a Ghast,
An extremely dangerous mob from the game Minecraft.
It was also one of the most difficult things
I've ever created.
But out of all the things that I could make from this game, why would I choose a creature that comes from the Nether? A dangerous underworld filled with oceans of lava and a plethora of terrifying monsters
Who want nothing more than to kill you.
as opposed to the other things I've made, most of which have been
Cute and harmless. It's not that I didn't like making them, it's that there's one thing I've always regretted. And that's not learning electrical engineering while I was still in school. Because I really want to make things that move, light up, make noise, or even have a function like shooting fire. And it just so happens that this deadly gelatinous jellyfish does all these things.
Now, making the eyes glow, that's the easy part. All you need is a battery and some LEDs. But the Ghast also shoots a fireball projectile, kind of like a gun, which I was a little hesitant about at first because, as we've seen in the past, firearms and Mojang don't typically mesh well. So instead, I thought, why not make a torch? Or maybe even a flamethrower, because believe it or not, flamethrowers aren't considered firearms, which is kind of funny considering it's basically an extension of your arm, but with fire. Although I realized that making one would be way too inaccurate.
Instead of a constant stream of fire, like a dragon, the Ghast shoots one single fireball.
So I really need to find a way to light a ball of fire and then fling it across the room, which in some ways seemed more dangerous than the flamethrower idea.
But then I remembered this one time in college, in my anthropology class. We all had an early morning exam and would have failed if not for my professor, who woke up the entire classroom by launching a ball of fire across the room. Not with his mouth though, but with his bare hand. It was like magic. It turns out it wasn't magic at all though, but a device magicians use called a fire shooter.
Not only that, it's a device which is completely legal and not considered a firearm. Therefore, Mojang approved. I also found the perfect YouTube video on how to make one, and it's basically a mini cannon consisting of a loaded barrel and some form of an igniter. I went ahead and made mine using a tiny aluminum barrel, which I tapped to be able to screw on what's called a glow plug. It's a component typically used to power the combustion engine of an RC car, but it also works great for lighting fireballs. Which brings me to the next key ingredient, flash cotton and flash paper, otherwise known as nitrocellulose. Basically cotton and paper which is treated in a mixture of acids to make it more flammable. The cotton gets inserted into the barrel, followed by the paper. Then, when the glow plug ignites, it'll ignite the cotton, which then propels the paper forward, simultaneously also igniting it. Making the device was surprisingly easy. The only other thing it needed was a battery and a switch. That was it.
It was almost too easy. If I wanted to truly be an electrical engineer, I was going to have to take it up a notch by designing some of my own circuits.
I consulted the official Minecraft Mobestiary for inspiration, and noticed its insides actually looked pretty complex. It even shows it having a brain, and could that be an igniter?
So it was obvious. What I had to do was somehow combine the glowing eyes with the fire shooter. And that is where my brain began to melt.
You see, I thought I would be able to combine the two by simply connecting them to the same battery. So when I pressed the button, the eyes and igniter would glow. But to my surprise, that didn't work.
Shoot, okay, so the igniter's working, but the LEDs aren't going off. So I've been researching for literally days now, and I think I just found out what the issue is.
The LEDs require a 3-volt battery to work, and while the glow plug can work on a 3-volt battery, I discovered it was drawing so much current that it was creating a voltage drop. So by the time the battery power reached the LEDs, that 3-volt battery was now more like a 1.5-volt battery, which is not enough to turn on the LEDs.
So I did end up consulting some electrical engineers on Discord, and ultimately I came to the same conclusion. I'm gonna have to use 2 separate batteries for this to work. But that just brought me back to where I started, with 2 separate devices not working as one system, which was frustrating because I had already spent so much time on a solution that didn't work.
Essentially, I want my Ghast to work just like the one in game, where everything works at the same time. The eyes glow, the Ghast cries, and out comes a flaming ball of death. So as a last-ditch effort, I regrettably hired someone on Fiverr to help. But they didn't help at all, and in fact, I lost money. Not to mention I ruined several LEDs and a glow plug in the process, and had to buy more.
I guess that's what I deserve for cheating and basically trying to get somebody to do the work for me. But I was literally about to give up.
I just don't know enough about electricity to be able to create my own circuits. I'm not an electrical engineer, and I guess it was too late to start learning now. So I packed all my things, threw them in a closet for a week, and moved on with my life.
But then I realized, sure, I may not be an engineer, but if Minecraft teaches us anything, it's how to grow and survive.
To progress through the game, you have to fight to the death. You can't just cower away and give up. I mean, sure, you may not lose everything if you run away, but you won't gain anything either.
And the same rules apply to real life. I'm not an electrical engineer, but I'm also not a quitter. So I decided to keep going.
I kept going, kept researching for days, watching videos, testing circuits, looking up random components until my brain exploded. And I wouldn't stop until I found a solution. And a solution I found. It was even better than I could have anticipated.
And the answer was this: a MOSFET.
Instead of getting the eyes and fire shooter to be on one circuit with the same battery, I could instead make a combination circuit where the fire shooter is dependent on the eyes.
Essentially, the eyes would act like the safety on a gun. When the eyes are off, you can't shoot fireballs. But when they're on, oops.
That's because the MOSFET acts like a portal, separating the glow plug and the battery. Imagine the evil piglins from the Nether are the current being supplied by the battery, who desperately want to set fire to the glow plug. However, by default, the portal is closed, so they can't enter. To open it, we need a second power source, which in our case is the circuit powering the LEDs. This opens the portal, thus allowing all the piglins to flow through and make fire.
So I immediately tested this new design to see if it would work. And it did. Kind of.
It wasn't fiery world domination, but more like a small campfire for roasting marshmallows.
The glow plug wasn't getting nearly hot enough to shoot fireballs, which meant there was another problem, and thus more research and more testing needed to be done. But the solution was a lot more simple this time.
I checked the spec sheet of the MOSFET, which told me that the gate starts to open at 0 to 1 volts, which is around the battery I was using. But the key words here are start to open. In order to fully open, it would need 10 volts. But since 10 volt batteries aren't readily available, I figured a 9 volt battery would be big enough. And it was.
I finally had a device with everything working together, and it was a circuit of my own design. But what's the point of a fully functional system if I don't have a big marshmallow to stick it in?
So I 3D printed an enclosure I made on the computer, which will act as a housing to hold all the electronics. You can imagine it being a sort of skeleton for the Ghast, and all the electronics are its organs. And now that I know it all works, I can permanently fuse them together using a soldering iron. Then I just needed to cover the Ghast with some marshmallowy flesh, which I thought about using real marshmallows for, but after realizing how sticky and unmanageable that would be, I decided on another material.
This is air dry clay, which is the closest clay to marshmallow that I could find. It actually has the same texture as the Ghast in the Minecraft movie, so it was perfect.
That's because I decided to make my Ghast look like a combination of a Minecraft movie and the in-game version of the creature. The Ghast is described as being a terrible beast with a soft body covered in scars, which I was able to capture simply from the imperfections and wrinkles that developed in the clay. I also decided to model the face after the movie version. The Ghast is supposed to be scary, so sculpting the face to look more like this, well, you get the point. The arrangement of legs, however, are more like the Ghast in-game. I was a little worried about how sturdy they'd be, so for good measure, I made them out of toothpicks encased in some epoxy sculpt. Next was to create the illusion of its deep abyssal eyes and mouth, which I ended up painting black. This is more accurate to the in-game version as well, which has black eyes and a glowing red pupil, as opposed to just fire. I also used charcoal powder to add some shading and dirty the Ghast up a bit. I thought this was a really clever medium to use, considering charcoal is really just burnt organic material, and the tears running down the Ghast's face are actually stained from ash. I was just about to finish it by spraying it with a workable fixative followed by a matte clear coat, only to just now realize my Ghast does not make a sound when it shoots the fire. I was so focused on getting the LEDs and the fire shooter to work that I completely forgot about arguably maybe one of the most important features of the Ghast. Ask anyone, the thing most synonymous with Ghasts is the chill you get when you hear its cries echo through the nether. The anticipation that your impending doom awaits, foreshadowing the second wind of fear that is the glowing red eyes and lethal fireballs. Ah, gosh, I have to do it. I will regret this build forever if it doesn't make sound. Luckily, I ended up finding this thing, which is actually a soundboard meant to be used for greeting cards. Though, it should work for my purposes as well. It also already included a speaker, which was an added bonus. All I needed to do was figure out how I was going to add it to my existing circuit. Remember that conversation I had with the electrical engineer? Well, he mentioned a component which, at the time, I completely overlooked. That's okay though, because it ended up being perfect for this situation instead. Essentially, this button can be used to switch two different circuits on and off. So I swapped my current button with this new one and then shared the existing 9-volt battery that powers the LEDs to also power the soundboard, which I wound up having to use something called a voltage regulator to make work. Using this along with some capacitors will basically turn the 9-volt battery into a 5-volt battery. Otherwise, the soundboard might burn up. After hooking everything up, I was kind of nervous because up until this point, I've had nothing but problems when I tested things. But to my surprise, it worked immediately. No problems, no more researching, it just worked. It was a testament of how much I've grown since the start of this project. I could now design my own circuits with a certain level of confidence, and for the first time, I actually felt like an electrical engineer.